Hi, thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you. Today, you are in for a real treat. We'll be hearing from two members of the Frye team, Faith Brower, our Director and Curator of Collections, and Teresa Redden, our Registrar. They'll share stories and insights about one of Seattle's great treasures, the Frye Collection. Today's presentation is brought to you on behalf of the Frye Forever Legacy Society. We're really thrilled to have you all here today. At the heart of the Frye's mission is a commitment to keeping art, including, of course, the permanent collection, free and accessible to all to inspire and delight everyone in Seattle and beyond. This mission began with the vision and foresight of our founders, Charles and Emma Frye, who created a free museum for the people of Seattle. Today, our Frye Forever members help carry that vision forward by including a gift of any size to the Frye as part of their estate plans. This ensures the museum and its collection will thrive for future generations of art lovers. A number of you joining us today are already Frye Forever members. Thank you so much for your generosity and civic spirit. You are the inspiration for this event, and we'll be having more events like this throughout the year. A big thank you also to those of you who are longtime members joining us today. If you are curious about becoming a legacy donor, a legacy member, it's very easy. You can reach out to Honor or me. You can make a note in the chat, and we'll be providing information throughout the year. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Faith Brower, the Frye's Director and Curator of Collections. Faith works with the Frye's founding collection and its contemporary art holdings, drawing on her background in modern and contemporary art and specializing in curating exhibitions. Faith aims to make museum collections relevant and meaningful to our today's audiences. Welcome, Faith.
Thank you so much, Becky, and thank you, Honor, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. As Becky mentioned, I'm Faith Brower. I'm the Director and Curator of Collections here at the Frye, a position that I've had for about a year and a half now, although I've been working in museums for about 20 years, and most recently, not too far away, at the Tacoma Art Museum, where I was a curator. And I used to visit the Frye to fill my cup and gain some inspiration about art, so to speak. And now I'm just so pleased to be a part of the team here that cares for the Frye's unique collection and to create more opportunities for our community to consider great art and ideas. And as Becky mentioned, my work is twofold. It's largely curatorial, which includes researching and preparing exhibitions and programs to present the collection in very public-facing work. And I also oversee our collections team, which works to ensure the long-term preservation and access to the artworks in the collection. And this includes mostly behind the scenes work to manage the safety of the artwork in both storage and on display. And in collections, I often anthropomorphize artworks and joke that they are introverts because their long-term care relies on isolation and some other considerations like good climate controls and limiting light and their exposure to light, along with some other safety considerations, because art materials do degrade over time. And our goal is really to maintain these works for now and for future generations. And so we manage the risks of all of the artwork that's in the Frye's collection, even with handling and moving the artwork, which we consider very carefully, and it's accomplished by trained art handlers. And so every detail of the collection is very carefully thought out and planned, which is something that our team works on every day. And so later in this program, you'll hear from my colleague, Teresa Redden, who is the museum's registrar, and she'll unpack some more of the details of our collections processes for you. And we'd also be happy to answer any questions at the end of the program. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our collection in general and then look more carefully at a few of the museum's treasures. And as you may know, the Frye has about almost 1,600 artworks in the permanent collection. And the Frye displays about 10% of its collection each year, which is slightly higher average than most museums. And this means that most of the collection remains in storage. And so today I'm going to talk through a number of works that are in storage and that are not on view. And I call our storage area the museum's vault, hence the name for our program today, our virtual vault, where we'll be sharing some details of the works that we don't get to see every day. The Frye's collection is widely understood to be the founding collection, and we will look briefly at that this morning, but I'm also planning to discuss some other works from the collection and to unpack a few of our newly acquired works that speak to a few of our collecting priorities. But first, I thought I would share some of these details about our entire collection with you so that you could get a sense of how much is the founding collection versus other areas of our collection. And so hopefully you can see that pie chart that's on the screen now to show different areas of the collection, with the founding collection making up about 15% of the total collection. And in the Frye's collection, about 96% of our work is 2D or two-dimensional work, meaning that paintings and prints make up the largest percentage of our collection, followed by other works like watercolors, largely works on paper, watercolors and drawings and photography. So this means that sculpture and new media works are less common in our collection. So a lot of our practices revolve on caring for two-dimensional works. And since our collection is largely painting and prints, you'll find greater variation if we look at different aspects of the collection, like the type of collections based on region, which you see on the screen now. So the largest portion of our collection is American art, and that's not including our Northwest specific collection or our Alaskan specific collection. But those are the next two highest percentage categories for our collection. So the top three categories really are encompassing American art. And so when you combine American and Northwest and Alaskan art, you're looking at the bulk of the Frye's collection. And then, as I mentioned, our founding collection is about 15% of the total holdings for the museum. And then our smallest collection would be an other category, but before that, it would be our European and Russian collection that's not including our founding collection. So we do count that separate. And in this next slide, you'll see how the founding collection is largely European and American work. And excuse me just a moment, I'm just having a little trouble advancing my slides, but here we go. So here's a little bit more detail about the artworks in our founding collection, which includes 232 paintings. And as I mentioned, it's largely European work with a strong focus on German art. And that largely relates to the background of our founders, whose portraits you see here. Charles and Emma Frye were both children of German immigrants. And so when building their own art collection, they really honed in on a number of German artists that spoke to their personal backgrounds. And they also were very interested in what was in vogue at the time, which was largely European academic painting. And as many of you probably know, academic painting has this hierarchy of genres, which includes history paintings, and that can also include religious subjects, mythological subjects, allegorical and literary subjects. And the Fryes have quite a good representation of history paintings in their collection. But the next step in the main genres of European academic painting is portraiture, both individuals and groups and self-portraits, and the Frye's founding collection is strong in portraiture as well. And then genre painting was also incredibly important. Scenes of everyday life, often with moral undertones, and the Fryes have some notable examples of genre painting. And then finally, landscapes were and still lifes were important subjects for academic painting. And these areas of painting are what the Frye is known for. When you visit the Frye Art Museum, you've probably spent time with our salon, which you can see on the slide behind us. And the salon really captures a wonderful array of work in these various subjects. And the works that I'm going to show you today, whether they're from the founding collection or our larger collection, will speak to a lot of these different areas. So you'll see how artists, both from the past and present, are still considering history painting and portraiture, genre painting, landscapes, and still lifes in a variety of ways. And the Frye is actively collecting in those areas. So the first work that I'm going to show you, excuse me, um, you may be very familiar with one of our premier works in the Frye Salon, which is Frans van Stuk's revered painting, The Sin, which is here on the left. We have a number of works by van Stuk in the collection that are on view in the salon, and those three works are on this slide for you. And von Stuck is one of the more well-known artists in the founding collection from his very prominent role in the Munich secession, an art movement at the turn of the last century that did challenge a lot of the artistic norms of the time. And in von Stuck's Sin, as well as the Judgment of Paris that you see in the center, you'll see that like myths and allegories were very popular subjects for von Stuck. The Judgment of Paris, of course, taken from Homer's Iliad. And the painting on the far right, you'll see, is the artist's daughter and is a beautiful portrait of her. And I'm calling specific attention to that because of the painting that I actually wanted to talk with you all about in a little bit more detail, which we don't have on view very often, but is by von Stuck and is called The Duel. And this painting is from 1907, so it's a very prime period for von Stuck. And the Fryes actually saw von Stuck's work at the Chicago World's Fair that we largely associate with what the event that catapulted them into becoming the art collectors that we know them as today. And so they would have seen von Stuck's work in that setting and become familiar with his impact on German art from the Munich secession, and then paid attention to him as an artist who that they wanted to collect, and they acquired a number of works by von Stuck. And I think this painting here is an incredible example of his work. And I wanted to focus on the woman in the painting who, for me, looks a lot like the daughter that we saw on the last slide with the red flower in her hair. And often we see artists doing that. They're working on an idea for a larger painting and often sketching that in paint over and over again until they get the details and the qualities of that portrait just right. And then they'll apply those techniques that they've rehearsed in other portraits and apply that to a larger narrative painting, which is what you see here as two men are pictured dueling over a woman. And so we have the two men who are set in deep perspective with a large, long, white arched hallway with a Doric column at the center. And a lot of these details of the painting that really make it a visually interesting work are hallmarks of von Stuck's style and features that you would see if you went to Munich to visit the Villa Stuck, which is where much of his work remains today and where he had an incredible opportunity to present his ideas in architecture and art combined into this very spiritual experience. And this work reminds me of some of his historical and mythological allegorical works, and because of some of these classical features that you see in his arches and in his background setting that I think also speak to his background as an architect. And you can see how he's paying very careful attention to all of that line work and detail, which I think really makes this a fascinating painting to study. I just wanted to call out, so while the founding collection is very prominent in German art, we have a smaller European collection, which is also incredibly significant. And I just wanted to shine some light on the Picasso and Renoir that are in the Frye's collection. It's pretty unusual to see paintings by Picasso and Renoir in Seattle museums. And so this is a real fun feature to share with you all, that the museum was able to collect these works earlier, actually in the 1980s. And they were most likely collected because, of course, of the artist's prominence, and being able to acquire Picasso and Renoir was important for the Frye. And also for the way that these works would speak to the founding collection. And so there are a few still live paintings in the founding collection. So these works would complement that very nicely, which is probably one of the reasons they were selected for the collection. Also being just incredible examples of the artist's work that's a little different from what we know them for. And so it's really nice when a museum can offer a very important artist like the two artists here, but show a work that may be a little less familiar to people. Of course, we know Picasso for his cubism, and you can see that he's taking an interesting compositional approach to this floral arrangement here. Similarly, Renoir, we associate more with his portraitures and group paintings, and to have him focus on a nice still life is also really interesting to see his treatment of the roses in the vase here, and would speak to larger holdings in the museum's collection. Another interesting aspect of the collection is our Russian collection, and I wanted to call some attention to this beautiful portrait by Ilya Repin, who was one of the most famous artists in Russia at the early 19th century, but we've lost a lot of information about him in our era. But he was born to a poor family in Russia, and um, he was able to become a student in St. Petersburg, where he studied art. And later, in the 1870s, he traveled to Europe, where he studied art in France and Italy. And we're going to see some of the French and Italian techniques impact and influence his practice. But he did return to Russia, where he devoted himself to painting. And he's largely known for his historical paintings, but also his incredible portraits. And seeing this picture of a young woman here really moved me for its incredibly realist qualities. And the artist Repin, he's known for a very famous group of painters in Russia that in English we call the wanderers or the itinerants. And they're a group of Russian realist artists who were breaking away from the strict rules of the academy, very similar to the Munich secessionists that we see in von Stuck's work. And in Russia, we see this group, the Wanderers, focusing on everyday scenes and people and poverty. And they became what the social realist style of paintings used as their inspiration. And a lot of these artists were working in the 1870s and 1880s, and they ended up really dominating Russian art for about 20 or 30 years. And Repin was one of the members of this group, and they held exhibitions all over Russia that really commented on the daily life of people in Russia at the time, which was in great contrast to what the academies were promoting for the arts. They had dozens of exhibitions. Their last exhibition was held in 1923, and many of them went on to join the Association of Artists in Revolutionary Russia. But their work as a group is just incredibly highly regarded, and I think we can see why with this portrait by Redden here, where it's a very evocative, emotional painting. It's from 1889, which is fairly early in the artist's career. He went on to make incredible work that I encourage you to look into if it's an area of your interest. But what we see in some of this early work is that influence from Europe, where he likely was beginning to see some Impressionist work. So you see some really loose brushstrokes in her shirt in particular. And throughout the years, he would really fine tune that brush stroke later on and paint nearly photorealist style work. But I think seeing this early work by him is really incredible example. And then looking at it in terms of his entire career, you can see how he evolves and changes as an artist. And there are a number of other Russian artists who are in the museum's collection. I wanted to show you this work by Isaac Levitan just as a comparative image. He's of a slightly younger generation than Repin, but also followed in that Wanderers movement. And what we see here also, I think, is a striking relationship to Impressionism and ideas that were happening in Europe. And this is just a wonderful painting from the late 19th century of two haystacks. And it really captures Levitan's specialty in this atmospheric landscape painting. And his colors are just phenomenal. And he's really thinking through ideas similar to the Impressionists that we're so familiar with. He was a master of plein air painting, often creating works outdoors and in front of his subjects. And the museum is very lucky to have several of these works by Russian artists in their collection. I want to take you through a couple other aspects of the collection quickly. Some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with John Singer Sargent's work, and we have this magnificent portrait of Mrs. Frederick William Roller in the collection. And this painting is from 1895, and we do like to claim Sargent as an American painter, although he spent so much of his time in Europe, in Paris and London in particular. And this portrait is about 10 years after one of his most notable paintings, the portrait of Madame X from 1884. That's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection. And I had the wonderful opportunity to go to New York earlier this year and see that painting. In the Met's collection, they did a wonderful presentation and catalog about Sargent's time in Paris in the 1880s. And I actually found an incredible striking similarity between our portrait here of Mrs. Roller and Madame X. And it really is in the presentation of the portrait with the white woman in full standing frame, standing kind of in a three-quarter portrait with her hair turned up in an updo and wearing a gorgeous black dress. Of course, Mrs. Roller is much more conservatively presented with her shoulders covered, which was one of the reasons Madame X was incredibly scandalous for the time, because she had a shoulder strap that was missing and her bare shoulders were exposed. But they both stand in front of a muted light brown background, and I imagine that Mrs. Roller might have known the success of the portrait of Madame X and wanted her portrait painted in a similar manner. We do now know that Mrs. Frederick Roller, her name is Eva Ayton. She came from a prominent Welsh family, and she married a German businessman who had immigrated to the UK, and that is where they lived. They had a son who was a painter, George Conrad, and George and John Sargent were friends and close associates. So we believe that Sargent painted this portrait of his friend's mother, either as a favor to his friend who was also a painter, or in his interest of creating hundreds and hundreds of portraits of the social life in Britain at the time. So I know I'm coming up on my time, so I just wanted to quickly show you a few other highlights. We can talk about these topics more in the Q&A or at another time. But you may be familiar with the idea that the Frye has an incredible collection of Alaskan works, and that really relates to our founders' history as well. As you may know, the Frye set up part of their meatpacking industry in Alaska, and because the business was held there for so long, they did start acquiring works of Alaska. And a number of the museum directors and curators afterwards continued in that tradition and acquired these magnificent works, the one on left by Rockwell Kent and the one on the right by the Seattle-based Eustace Ziegler. Many of you may also know how strong the Northwest collection is at the Frye, and I wanted to call out this magnificent work by Z. Lin. Z. Lin is a painter who is teaching at the University of Washington, and his work is incredibly detail-oriented and research-based. It is magnificent. This work was based off of the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. Z himself immigrated from China, first to the UK and then the United States, where he's been for the last 20 plus years working and teaching in the arts. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight a recent acquisition for you by a local artist, Megan Reipenhoff. She is largely known for her photography, and here she's created a cameraless cyanotype that is just magnificent. If you notice the size and the scale of this print and the details, it's 88 inches long, which make it rather challenging to display, which was one of the reasons I wanted to present it to you today. Cyanotypes are also some of those introverts I talked about earlier. They're highly sensitive to light, which makes it another really special consideration for displaying. But I just wanted to share with you this incredible work that we acquired just about a year ago. And Megan's process is incredibly unique. She takes paper and is laying it into rivers and different waterways in the Northwest and allowing this photoemulsion to take place, where then the effects of the river or the water are then captured onto the paper. And so you can see different evidence of the branches or the snow or the rain and the current that all manifest onto her works on paper, which are just phenomenal. So I do hope we can share that in person sometime soon. And then finally, I'll just share one last aspect about the collection, which is that while we are not able to show all of our collection, we do try to accommodate loan requests from other museums, and we have for many decades. And some of our most popular loans are the Russian-American artist Nikolai Fechin, which you see here on the left. His Lady in Pink has been a much requested painting over the years. And then more recently, we acquired Clarissa Tosin's sculpture on the right, which you may have seen in a recent exhibition that we had here at the Frye. And this has gone on to travel to the Hammer Museum, most recently in LA, followed by a presentation in Texas and then in Northern California, and it will be on view soon at the Nevada Museum of Art. And so by loaning artwork to various museums, we're able to extend our reach and help other curators share great art and ideas that are connected to the Frye's collection. So I apologize, I went over a bit, but I'd love to introduce you to my colleague, Teresa Redden, who is the museum's registrar. She brings an incredible amount of talent and expertise to managing the care of our collections. And so, Teresa, please take it away.
Unmute. Hello, I hope you can all hear me now. And thank you, Faith, for all of those amazing details. So welcome to what I am calling the collection prequel. Faith talked about the collection, and now as we continue, I'm going to talk about the paper trail that is the prequel to actually having the collection. For my peek behind the scenes, I'm sharing the journey an object goes through on paper before you ever see it on display at the Frye Art Museum. We will start by looking more closely at a role that is near and dear to my heart, the museum registrar. This role is essential to the collections team and the accessioning process, but it is invisible to visitors. After I convince you that you too would like to be a museum registrar, I'll walk through the process of accessioning, which is how an object officially becomes part of the museum's permanent collection. So let's see if I can forward here. So what is a museum registrar? In general, the museum's registrar is the guardian of the collection, protecting both the safety of the objects and the integrity of the collection. We are the record keeper, the risk manager, and logistics coordinator for the collection. While curators and directors and art committees choose what we collect and how we interpret it, the registrars ensure that every object is properly documented, tracked, stored, insured, and legally owned. In short, we are the paper trail. We're the gatekeeper and the voice of caution for the collection. Forward. Okay. The core responsibilities for a registrar span several major areas of museum operations. We are collections management, documentation and record keeping. We are the logistics and movement managers. We are risk management and oversee security for the objects. We also do legal and ethical oversight, and we help with all the loans and exhibitions. So there are a lot of details here, and it takes a lot to learn it all. There are numerous books and museology programs, including a very famous program at UW. It takes years, and each of these responsibilities, I feel, is absolutely worthy of its own webinar. But for today, I will sum it up to say that if an object changes location, changes ownership, or changes condition, the registrar is involved. So for the thing that's most pertinent to today's conversation is the registrar helps shepherd acquisitions through the accessioning process. So what is accessioning? Accessioning is the formal legal process by which an object becomes part of the museum's permanent collection. We cannot acquire every artwork we might be interested in and or are offered, and very difficult decisions must be made. We do this using a deliberate and selective process guided by the museum's acquisition policy. The policy consists of the museum's mission statement, our collection strengths and deficits, and our long-term strategic goals. Accessioning is a rigorous process that ensures that we preserve objects responsibly, that we maintain legal ownership of our collection, that we track objects over decades or centuries to come, and that we provide reliable information for researchers, educators, and the public. So acquisitions come in a variety of ways. A curator or a director may identify a potential acquisition and recommend it for purchase. Similarly, we may commission an artwork from an artist for purchase. or a donor may offer an artwork as a gift, or finally, we could also receive funds as a gift to purchase an artwork. Either way, as soon as something is proposed, we immediately begin gathering preliminary information and start an internal review by our collections team. We use a multi-factor checklist to establish the object's adherence to the museum's acquisition policy. And we go through every detail. We look at the relevance to the museum's mission. We do a full condition assessment, which I'll come back to because that's a huge part. We review the collection that already exists for comparable objects that might already exist in the collection. We also look at how the object may support future exhibits, programming, or research. We have to consider how much space is this going to take in our building and in storage, how much labor is involved to move it and handle it, and how much will that cost. We also have a lot of legal background research that we do to make sure that the title can be obtained clear and transferable. We check authenticity. We consider elements about health and safety. We look for any kind of restrictions on use, which we don't allow. And then we also look at fair market value and consider any ethical elements to this acquisition. It's kind of a lengthy process. I mentioned condition. A significant part of the review and considering an acquisition is its condition. We're looking at both the current state of the object as well as what the long-term care will entail to maintain the object for its life. We kind of obsess over identifying the object's vulnerabilities and anticipated risks. If you spend any time around a registrar, you will hear the phrase 10 agents of deterioration. These are the main forces acting on objects, and that's all objects, not just art, that cause their demise. And these elements we use to consider risk mitigation for that object. We do a risk analysis. We identify potential issues and long-term preservation and assess what we can do to slow that down, even though we know all things will deteriorate. So here's things from our collection that Faith already shared with you. It's a good example for talking about the internal review process. So when this object was proposed for acquisition, we start like we would with any object with a description, which seems obvious, but it takes time to really look at what is it. So in this case, the object is a silicone cast of a peach tree from the artist's garden that perished due to heat waves and drought in Los Angeles. To create the work, the artist brushed silicone onto the surface of the branches. And then once the silicone dried, she peeled the cast from the branch, turning it inside out. The resulting silicone cast retains the bark and imprinted tree and became the sculpture. So we worked with an independent conservator to review the condition and risks of deterioration. On the plus side, the silicone the artist used is reasonably archival and durable. It's an inert material. It won't off-gas. It won't stick to itself. That was the good news. However, there is wood and other organic materials stuck to the silicone. We will always have to monitor this piece and make sure there is not an invasion of pests. We also know that this material is known to stiffen with age. It could crack, it could become brittle. We also know that the organic material will continue to flake off every time we handle it. Finally, it's heavy. It's very heavy. And when it is not installed, it completely collapses on itself. And so we had to consider what would it take to build supports and store it safely so that we don't cause damage to it. And everything we came up with takes a huge amount of space to store this piece. So that seemed kind of negative, but at the end of the day, the value that the piece offered to the collection outweighed the material risk. So we've moved forward and we did a justification for the purchase. And a statement was prepared that the acquisition of this artwork will support the Frye's dedication to the West Coast artists and our commitment to addressing the inadequate representation of contemporary works by Latinx artists in the collection. Clarissa Tosin's work addresses the issues of our time. There's a whole document, but that gives you an idea of what I mean by, well, there are risks, but we can justify it as an important addition to the collection. So once the review is done, we've done our due diligence and we are ready to move forward with the whole process. A written document is prepared called a fact sheet, and it is basically, it pulls all the details we went through and allows us to justify the acquisition. To ensure final acquisition outcomes are properly supported and justified, all the acquisition proposals and gift considerations are presented to our Arts Committee for approval. Once the committee recommends approval, a donor and/or purchase resolution, depending on what type of acquisition it is prepared for the board to grant approval for moving forward. This proposal is very formal. It is a legal document, and it includes a provenance summary, a full condition report, legal considerations, and our connections to the museum mission. If the board then approves the resolution, the board president signs the resolution. Now we're getting somewhere. All decisions and supporting rationale are made in writing and retained with the object records. Once approved, we start moving forward with the legal and clear transfer of ownership. This includes getting titles obtained free and clear. It includes getting all written documents evidenced and secured in fireproof areas. We have fireproof storage cabinets to retain every single piece of paper. Sorry about all the paper use, but it's real. And depending on the method of acquisition, there are different documents that we have to include. If the object has been donated, we have to get a deed of gift, or if it's promised for the future, we get a promised gift agreement signed, dated. If it is purchased, we have to have an invoice, we need a proof of payment, and we also have to have a record of the source of funds. All of this is retained in the record. And finally, there is an official date of transfer. So if it is a donation, it is the date of the signature on the deed of gift. And then if it is a purchase, it's the date of final payment on the seller's invoice. So it doesn't stop there. We also need to know about copyright. Can we reproduce images of this? Can we use this in our education program? We have to research who owns the copyright for that object. And we have to figure out if we can get rights. We can get a non-exclusive license, which allows us to reproduce images of the object and use them with our programming. The registrar confirms that all signatures are complete, there are no restrictions, and that all paperwork is stored and digitized. Finally, the object gets an accession number. This is a unique number tied to that piece. We create numbers in a typical format that most museums use, which is the year, the collection group, and then the sequence in that acquisition. So for example, if you're looking at a piece and you see a number 2025.12.1, this represents the museum's 12th acquisition in the year 2025, and it's the first item in that grouping. So whatever the number is, this ties it to the permanent record and all associated documents. So I think of it as the object's ID card, and this will stay with it for the rest of its life. Now that it has a number, we can put it in our database and create hard copies that we retain in fireproof cabinets. So this object record contains all the details we've collected, measurements, materials, techniques, high quality photographs, provenance. We collect donor information and make sure we have our credit line noted correctly. We keep condition reports and we log storage locations and all associated rights and restrictions for the piece for reproduction. So this record becomes the museum's authoritative source for the object. There's no room for dirty data. A small error made today will haunt the object forever. Now we have a record for it. We create a label. We use that accession number and we physically mark the object. We're careful to do it in a reversible way that is conservation safe, but we make sure that every object has its number associated with it. And after marking the object, we place it in storage with proper support and proper conditions. At this point, the object is officially part of the collection, and you may one day see it on exhibition at the museum. A little footnote here. This particular painting is the smallest painting in the collection at 3.5 by 4 inches. It's also the cutest painting in the collection. And the gentleman who painted it has a sibling that has another piece in our collection. So if you're familiar with the peacock, this artist and that artist are siblings. So in conclusion, while we are only temporary stewards of the collection, if done correctly, our work will allow the collection to last far beyond any of our lifetimes. And that concludes my portion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Well, I'm here to let folks know that there's a Q&A section. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a PC, it might be in the upper right of a tablet. And you can find more help in the chat. But you're all typing questions, so we'll just get to them right away. We have the first question is, does the Frye ever sell some of its acquisitions? And if so, what are the primary reasons for doing so? Do we sell from our collection?
Teresa, I can take that one. What a great question. When the Frye acquires an artwork, we agree to be its owner in perpetuity. And so we do not sell the collection. If we were to consider deaccessioning an artwork from the collection, which means formally remove it from our care, then we would have the opportunity to sell the work at that time after it's been vetted and approved by the board for deaccessions. But any funds collected from a deaccession for all museums are required to go back into collections. So a museum has to go, these days it's changing a little bit in the COVID era. Certain museums have gained permissions to apply the sales from deaccessions to other processes, but historically and most routinely, any work that gets sold from a collection would have to go back into collections care or collections acquisitions. And the Frye, over its 75-year history, has a very small amount of work that has been deaccessioned over the years, nothing that I've seen too recently. But the reasons that museums deaccession work are often for redundancies in the collection, the quality of work, deterioration or damage from an artwork. Things like that are reasons that would justify an artwork for being deaccession. But it's not a process that's taken lightly, and it's something that involves a lot of research and consideration.
And I'll just add to that. This is why the whole process leading up to adding an artwork to the collection is taken so seriously. The intention is to do all the work up front so that you never have to face deaccessioning. The intention is once you accession it, you're taking care of it forever. It's a huge responsibility.
Thanks so much. Hey, we have another technical question. What is the non-exclusive license about?
I'll add to that. So that has to do with being able to reproduce images of an artwork. And if someone else, like the artist, owns the copyright, you can't automatically just start printing pictures of something that you own. A non-exclusive license is a way of having the right to do a select amount of reproduction. So we can print images of works in our collection that we may want to use for educational purposes or marketing. It doesn't necessarily give you full license to do a commercial printing for selling reproductions, but it allows you to do limited use of image reproduction. So the artist would retain the copyright and they could print images of their own work, but it allows us to work with pieces in our collection.
Great. Hey, we have a question about collecting, and what advice would you give to someone who is starting to create their own art collection? Or those of us who have very small.
The advice I like to give people is to collect what you love. Collect what you want to live with, what you want to be inspired by, what you want to wake up and see every day. And then you'll have made a great decision. And as you go through the process, you can become completely entrenched in it, as some collectors are, or you could pursue it as a hobbyist or and just collect once in a while what you see in galleries or from artists who you may know or from art fairs. There's a variety of ways to find art that you enjoy that's at your price point. But I always encourage folks to just understand that so much of art is subjective. And so to just collect what you love is really important. Teresa, do you have more thoughts on collecting?
Of course. I think collecting what you love is key. I think it's also important to understand what is it? What is it made of? What's going to happen to it when you bring it into your home? Can you take care of it? Can you physically move it yourself? For my home, I am very careful to collect art that I can physically move. I have limitations. And I'm not prepared to hire an art handling company every time I need to move something. So I consider scale when I look to add art to my home.
Thanks, Teresa. All right, folks are really fascinated with the with acquisitions, and we have a question. Such a fascinating process of acquisition. It seems to take time. Are you ever frustrated by competing with private collectors or investors?
It is a very time-consuming process. Um, I haven't had too much trouble with competition in that most artists, galleries, most of the places we would be acquiring works from genuinely want the work to have a good home. They're interested in it being part of a collection, and they're usually very patient with the whole process and don't tend to sell works out from under us. They want it to be at the Frye, and they're very helpful with the whole process. In fact, they'll actively give you additional information, bios about the artist, reference to other exhibitions and supporting materials to justify the purchase to our board. Most dealers, galleries, artists they understand the process and actually help us with it.
Here's a related question. Is a percentage of the Frye's budget designated for acquisitions? And Teresa, you had a slide in your presentation that showed the different ways that acquisitions come to us, but maybe Faith, you can, I'll just share with everybody, it's very small right now. So we depend on the generosity of our community. Faith?
Yes, thank you, Becky. Yeah, we do have a very modest acquisition budget, which is very common for museums today. Just to kind of piggyback off of the last question about whether or not we get frustrated with private collectors and investors, I can share that it can be discouraging of how they've private collectors and investors are able to drive the price point for art so high that so many museums feel priced out of artworks at auctions. So that can be frustrating. And also when an artwork goes to auction, the artist isn't making money from that sale generally. So a museum can justify acquiring work, especially when we're paying an artist directly for their work. That feels like a really genuine support of artists. But it can be frustrating for museums to feel like they cannot acquire significant works because the prices have ballooned so much over the decades. But the museum does have a small modest budget for acquisitions. The Frye has a little bit of a unique situation compared to other museums in the area. We do not have any specific endowments for acquisitions, so it does come out of our general operating expenses for the year. But that also means it's not restricted to any particular type of artwork. So we're able to acquire historical or contemporary or modern or works on paper or paintings. It's not restricted in any way like some of the endowed gifts that our neighbors may have. But like Becky said, like most museums today, we rely so much on our community for their support and generosity in gifts to the collection.
Terrific. I have a last observation from somebody. I always find that learning about a piece or a period or an artist significantly increases my appreciation. For example, I knew nothing about von Stuck, and now I will read up some more on him and enjoy his work at the Frye. Do you want to just mention the virtual collection? I expect everybody on this webinar today knows about it, but maybe you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning, Becky. Online on our fryemuseum.org website, you can find a tab for collections. And in that digital collection, we have now all of our collections through 2025 that are updated there. So you can do a search by artist, you can do a search by country, a keyword search for titles. dates. So it's a really exciting initiative that has all 1,568, I think, works online. And we have them organized in several different buckets, if you will. So you could look at the contemporary holdings, the recent acquisitions, the Northwest artists, or the founding collection, or you can do your own searches as well. And we have so many images for about, most of the work online has images of the work as well. So that's really exciting. And we also just recently this fall produced a new catalog about the collection, which, sorry, with my fancy background, it glitches a little bit, but it's called Floor to Ceiling. And this book is a design forward catalog about the founding collection. So if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to check it out. It is at the Frye store, and it's a beautiful gift. It's a beautiful way to explore the collection more in printed form.
Faith, Teresa, thank you so much. I think we're going to hand it off to Honor.
Yes, thank you, Faith and Teresa, and thank you everybody for being here today. Just quickly to mention, go back to that book that Faith was showing you all. If you please complete the survey that will pop up on your screen as you're leaving the webinar, we would so greatly appreciate it. Just sharing your ideas about future events, and topics that would be of interest for these virtual events and in-person events as well. And if you complete the survey, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a copy of that book. So again, thank you for taking a moment to complete that. And of course, you should always feel free to contact any of us directly with any questions or comments. My contact information is up on the screen right now. I know many of you know me and have my email already, but please do always feel free to contact me with any input or feedback or questions. And with that, I'd like to just thank you all again for joining us today, for being part of our community, and for being so curious and interested in our collection. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.